Hey guys, tonight we're wandering into a world where time slows down, moss creeps across stone like it's got nowhere better to be, and a single rock can be more emotionally complicated than your last 3 relationships combined. You find yourself stepping through a curved moon gate, the stone cool underfoot, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and distant plum blossoms. There's no music here, but somehow the breeze rustling through bamboo feels like a gentle lullaby. A tiny path of uneven stones leads deeper into the garden, winding just a bit too much for comfort on purpose, of course. Nothing in this place is meant to be easy. It's meant to be meaningful, which is kind of the same thing, depending on your tolerance for poetic suffering. Tonight we'll explore the soft, sleepy magic of ancient Chinese gardens places, where rocks are poems, trees are metaphors, and the sound of water is supposed to make you question your life choices. These aren't your average backyards. These are living scrolls, written not with ink, but with moss, mist, and oddly judgmental koi fish. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I like knowing which corners of the world we're softly boring to sleep. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start by crouching near a low stone bench, the kind that seems designed more for thought than for comfort. Around you, large vertical rocks rise like frozen waterfalls, jagged, craggy, but also somehow artistic? You squint at one shaped like a twisted ribbon of granite and wonder if it's supposed to resemble a mountain or if your sleep-deprived brain is just seeing snacks in everything now. But no, it is a mountain, sort of. In traditional Chinese gardening, stones weren't just decorative. They were symbolic geography. A single jagged limestone could represent a mountain range, a spiritual summit, or the flow of energy called qi through the universe. Think of them like punctuation marks in a sentence written across the garden's floor. Full stops, commas, dramatic pauses. You don't just walk past them, you read them. And the people who placed them here? Not landscapers in utility belts, but philosophers with calligraphy brushes. Garden design wasn't about planting tulips and calling it a day. It was a full-blown existential exercise. A sleepy stroll through one of these gardens was meant to simulate a journey through life, twisting paths, sudden openings, moments of stillness, and a rock that probably judges you just a little. Now here's the odd part. You're not really supposed to be the main character here. The rocks are. Some were chosen for their shape, craggy or smooth, pierced with holes like fossilized Swiss cheese. Others were appreciated for their texture, or the way they caught rain and dripped slowly, as if the stone itself were sighing. And yes, people gave them names: Elegant Mist, Sleeping Dragon, Old Man Laughing at the Moon. Basically, rocks with better social lives than most of us. Historians still argue whether the obsession with garden stones began with imperial influence or trickled up from scholar officials longing for mountains while stuck in court duties. What we do know is that by the Tang and Song dynasties, these rocks had become prized possessions. They were collected, gifted, and sometimes even stolen. Yes, rock theft. It's a thing. Imagine waking up to discover your prized boulder has been spirited away in the night by a rival poet with a donkey cart and poor boundaries. In the most famous gardens, rocks were more than decoration. They were personality. The best ones were imported from Lake Tai, famous for its odd, weathered limestone formations full of little hollows and folds. These weren't just stones. These were characters in a novel you walked through barefoot. And it wasn't just about looks. Placement mattered. You couldn't just plop a rock down and call it a day. It had to mean something. It had to suggest motion, balance, even mood. Some rocks were positioned upright to evoke strength. Others laid flat, suggesting rest or surrender. A scholar might sit and stare at one stone for hours, trying to feel its essence, its energy, or maybe just stalling on a poetry assignment. One quirky tidbit: there's an old superstition that placing a certain rock in the wrong spot could invite bad luck or disrupt the flow of energy in your life. So yes, even in ancient times, feng shui gave people decorating anxiety. But in all this calm contemplation of stones, you start to notice something else: silence. Or rather, the artful design of silence. The garden isn't quiet by accident. It's curated just like a poem. Every bend in the path hides and reveals the next scene like a line break. Every still pool reflects not only the sky, but also your own slowing breath. This isn't a walk through nature. It's a meditation, a lullaby made of granite. You glance down at your feet, and there, nestled between two mossy slabs, is a tiny sprout poking through, uninvited, yet perfectly placed. You can't help but wonder, did someone plan that too? Or is that nature reminding you who's really in charge? As you move on, stepping lightly over time-smoothed pebbles, you realize you haven't seen a single straight line. No symmetry, no trimmed hedges or manicured lawns. Instead, it's all flow and curve and soft decay. Ancient Chinese gardeners believed perfection was boring. Nature's chaos was more trustworthy and more beautiful. So if you ever feel like your life is a bit uneven, maybe even cracked in places, just remember, in a scholar's garden, that makes you valuable. You follow the winding path deeper, your footsteps muffled by weathered stone and soft moss. A breeze brushes your cheek, not strong, just enough to stir the bamboo leaves overhead like fingers sifting through old parchment. It smells faintly of rain, even though the sky's been dry for hours. That, too, feels intentional. Ahead, you spot a large rock framed perfectly between two ornamental pines. The tree on the left bows slightly, as if paying quiet tribute. The one on the right leans the opposite way, rebellious in posture, but still respectful in spirit. Together, they hold the space like stage curtains pulled back just far enough to spotlight the star. A tall, thin slab of Taihu limestone, riddled with holes like it's been slowly sipped away by time. You pause. Is it smiling? Maybe. This is what the ancient Chinese called a spirit rock. Not just a rock with a name, but a rock with an attitude, and possibly opinions. These spirit rocks were considered the bones of the earth pieces of sacred mountain essence, distilled into portable form. They were believed to radiate cosmic energy, the kind that linked heaven and earth, man and nature, tea and overthinking. Having one in your garden was like inviting a monk to live in your backyard, except this one didn't judge your shoes. Some emperors took the obsession too far. One emperor from the Song dynasty reportedly commissioned thousands of massive stones to be hauled into the imperial garden, some so large that entire neighborhoods had to be temporarily dismantled just to roll them through. This may sound absurd, but to him, these stones weren't clutter. They were cosmic real estate. Of course, the placement of each spirit rock was no casual affair. You couldn't just toss one next to your pond like a lawn gnome. A proper rock had to be staged with intention, like a solo in an opera. It needed a backdrop, perhaps a wall of whitewashed plaster or a burst of dark foliage to contrast its pale, gnarled surface. Light was also key. Shadows were cast and studied at different times of day to ensure the rock brooded just the right amount. Historians still argue whether these placements followed a strict symbolic system or were driven more by artistic instinct. But one thing is clear: these rocks weren't chosen for their symmetry or smoothness, quite the opposite. The more twisted, eroded, and improbable a rock looked, the more valuable it became. You shift your weight and move closer to another, smaller boulder, this one squat, pockmarked, with a weirdly endearing lump near the top that looks like a melting teapot. It's easy to imagine a gardener kneeling here 900 years ago, squinting at that very lump, sipping actual tea, and deciding this rock spoke more truth than any emperor ever had. That's the thing, these gardens weren't just for nobles. Scholar officials, many of whom failed or abandoned government life, became the real heroes of rock appreciation. They retreated from politics and chose to express their philosophies in moss-covered stone and trickling streams. The garden was a rebellion, a soft-spoken, overgrown middle finger to bureaucracy. One of the most famous examples is the Garden of the Humble Administrator in Suzhou. Despite the title, its rock arrangements are anything but modest. The garden's central feature, a tall, cloud-shaped stone, was meant to evoke both spiritual yearning and the melancholy of political exile. You know, casual, light-hearted themes. As you stroll past your fifth oddly poetic boulder, you notice something else. The rocks aren't just seen, they're viewed. There's a difference. In Chinese gardening tradition, some rocks were meant to be admired from a seated pavilion, some from across a pond, and some only through a tiny moon gate where they'd briefly flash into view like punctuation marks in a whispered sentence. This wasn't walk around and snap pictures landscaping. It was slow art, intentional, immersive, and just vague enough to make you question your place in the cosmos. You step into a small pavilion, now 3 wooden pillars holding up a sloped tile roof. The view from here is perfect. A jagged rock perches on a raised platform across a still pond. Its reflection cuts deep into the water, trembling slightly with the breeze. The scene feels still, but alive, like the rock is breathing slower than you and inviting you to match its pace. Nearby, an old gardening manual lies open well in your imagination anyway. In reality, it's just a mental flicker from something you remember. Ming Dynasty scholars writing obsessively detailed treatises about the ideal rock. The 4 prized qualities: thinness, perforations, wrinkling, and translucence. Yes, you heard that right, wrinkling. These weren't just landscape features. These were portraits of time. One quirky tidbit: some ancient collectors reportedly whispered to their rocks. Not in a creepy way, okay. Maybe in a creepy way, but out of a belief that great stones absorbed your mood. If you were angry, the rock darkened. If you were calm, it softened. No scientific evidence, but honestly, if you've ever stared at a lava lamp for 10 minutes straight, you kind of get it. And you start to feel it too. There's something comforting in this deliberate stillness, something deeply sleepy about the way rocks don't try to impress you. They just sit and are, and remind you that the world has been turning long before your deadlines or inbox or laundry pile ever existed. You look up, and for the first time notice that the moon has risen. It's caught perfectly in the crook of a pine branch, which itself leans just enough to center the glow behind a standing stone. You don't know if someone planned this moment, but in a garden like this, you wouldn't put it past them. You keep walking, and now the stones begin to change. Not in a magical way, though, honestly. If one started levitating, you probably wouldn't even flinch at this point, but in their personality. The tall, grandstanding Taihu rocks have slowly given way to quieter, rounder forms. These are river stones, smooth and unassuming, tucked into the corners of shaded paths or resting beneath ferns like shy houseguests. Their placement feels deliberate, casual at first glance, but on closer inspection, everyone seems to be holding something together. That one near your left foot is wedging a bamboo culm upright. Another further along props up the edge of a trickling stream. You spot one shaped like a curled cat, dozing under the eaves of a pavilion. It's hard not to smile. This section of the garden isn't trying to impress anymore, it's just trying to hold space. And that, in ancient Chinese garden design, was often the whole point. You pass under an arched bridge so low and subtle, it's practically a rumor. The stones under your feet change again, square-cut pavers fitted together like a mosaic of ancient patience. Some even have inscriptions carved into them. A verse here, a single character there. One reads, "Empty heart, still stone." That's not just poetic, it's practically a diagnosis. Historians still argue whether these poetic inscriptions were added by the garden owners or later scholars. Some believe they were composed on the spot during drinking parties, an ancient version of writing on your friend's cast, except more philosophical and less sharpie. Others think these verses were curated as a personal diary, carved into the ground as a slow confession to the sky. You lean closer to another inscription. It's faint, smoothed by centuries of footsteps. Just one word remains legible. Listen. Okay, that one's a little spooky. But you do. And what you hear isn't just bird song or wind in the bamboo. It's that soft, ever-present hush of nothing urgent. The kind of silence you forgot existed. It's probably what your phone sounds like when the battery finally dies. Peaceful, reassuring, borderline miraculous. One fringe theory you remember reading somewhere, maybe in a footnote, maybe in a dream, is that some of these stones were chosen not just for their looks, but for their sound. Gardeners would knock on them, listening for tone and resonance. A good rock wasn't just visually poetic, it had to sing when struck. Some even had names based on their acoustics like Dragon's Hollow or Ghost's Whisper. Imagine auditioning rocks like a choir. Imagine being the guy who rejected one because it was too flat in the upper register. Now that's commitment. You cross another path, and now the garden shifts again. The space opens. A large open courtyard emerges, ringed by covered walkways. At its center, a massive stone set in white gravel. Alone, unmoved, utterly unapologetic. This is the kind of rock that ends arguments just by existing. It's too heavy to move and too strange to ignore. Scholars referred to such monoliths as host stones, the dominant presence in a garden scene. Everything else, shrubs, walkways, minor stones, existed only in relation to it, like a planet around which everything else orbits. This particular stone, rough and oblong with a twist near the top, might represent a mountain peak, or a dragon's shoulder, or just the unshakable lump of stress you carry behind your left eye. Its meaning was never fixed. That's the beauty and the madness of Chinese garden aesthetics. Symbolism was layered and shifting. A rock could be a cloud at dawn, or a tombstone at dusk, or the exact shape of regret. It depended on the viewer, and maybe the weather. You sit down on a nearby stone bench, carved, of course, from yet another kind of rock. Cold at first, then pleasantly grounding. You feel your weight settle into it, your breathing slow. Around you, the silence deepens, and then a soft crunch of gravel as a turtle the size of a dinner plate ambles across the courtyard like it owns the place, which, in a way, it does. You smile. Because of course there's a turtle. The ancient Chinese believed in the harmony of opposites yin and yang, hard and soft, stone and water, turtle and rock. Turtles lived long lives and carried the world on their backs in some mythologies. Stones outlived everything, but couldn't move. Together, they made a perfect scene, motion and stillness in quiet conversation. One quirky historical note: wealthy gardeners would sometimes carve their favorite rocks with tiny viewing notches, grooves worn or cut into the stone to guide your gaze. Look from here, and the ridge resembles a mountain. Look from there, and it becomes a phoenix in flight. a kind of ancient Instagram filter, but made of limestone and philosophy. The turtle finally makes it to the edge of the pond and plops in with a splash so modest it barely disturbs a single lily pad. Ripples move outward. One reaches the big host stone, and for just a moment its reflection wobbles. Then stillness returns. And you remember something else, an old anecdote about the poet Su Shi, who once wrote that the true joy of rocks wasn't in their permanence, but in how they framed impermanence. They were the pause in the music, not the note. That idea lingers with you now. Because this garden, these rocks, they aren't here to tell a story with a beginning, middle, and end. They're here to hold moments, to turn silence into scenery, to catch moonlight like a bowl catches rain. You stand slowly. The stone beneath you is already cool again, like you were never there. But that's okay. You're not here to leave a mark. You're here to drift through someone else's quiet dream and maybe, for once, not wake up thinking of your to-do list. Just listen. Just walk. Just let the rocks do the thinking for you. The path leads you gently onward, curling like smoke between dark pine trunks and curling vines. There's a hush in the air, not heavy, but expectant-like. Even the frogs are holding their breath. You're now in what might be called the philosopher's corner of the garden, though no actual signs tell you so. The clues are subtle. The calligraphy on a wall screen quoting Laozi, the way the moss creeps precisely halfway up the rocks, the lingering smell of old incense in the breeze. It's the kind of place where scholars once came not to debate, but to contemplate. Big difference. One involves talking, the other is just very intense staring at leaves. Here the rocks are arranged almost in pairs, like they're having a silent conversation. One tall and jagged, the other squat and round. One with a hole, one solid as cake. You wonder if they're arguing or flirting. Possibly both. This part of the garden is influenced heavily by Taoist thought where rocks weren't just decorative. They were cosmic symbols, the hard bones of the earth, tiny pieces of mountain brought down to mingle with humans. According to Taoist lore, placing a rock just so could harmonize your qi and help you achieve internal balance, or at least avoid bad feng shui and an upsetting week. One particularly famous rock type you notice here is called Ying stone. Sourced from the Anhui province, it's darker, denser, and dramatically ridged like a frozen storm cloud. These were prized not just for their texture, but for their hidden energy. Some said they pulsed with yin essence. Others said they just looked cool. Both are valid. Historians still argue whether these stones were selected purely for aesthetics or for metaphysical alignment. Some texts suggest entire gardens were designed around a single rare stone. Others claim the gardener would first meditate beside the rock for days before deciding where it should live. No pressure, right? You pause at one rock that's particularly dramatic, tall, dark, and tilted at a precarious angle, like it's about to whisper a secret. Its base is balanced on two smaller stones, like stilts. Beneath it, a single sprig of grass grows in defiance of gravity and probably reason. According to legend, a similar rock once fell during a storm and was deemed so spiritually significant that they rebuilt the entire courtyard around its new resting place. The lesson: when a rock speaks, you listen, even if it breaks your tea house. Nearby, a circular moon gate frames the next view. You walk through it, and the space transforms again. Now you're in the poetry garden, a smaller, more intimate space. It's hemmed in with bamboo fencing and trellises, the rocks here much lower to the ground, like punctuation marks in a paragraph. Each one seems to mean something, though you couldn't say what. One is cupped by a flowering bush like a palm holding a precious gem. Another is wedged under a rain chain, catching drops like tiny bells. This area, historically, was often used for composing verse. Not big, epic odes, just a line or two to capture a fleeting feeling. There's an old practice called shi yin, or poetic resonance, where poets would read aloud beside a rock and judge their words by the echo. If the stone approved, the poem stayed. If not, back to the inkstone. You try it yourself, murmuring a phrase as you pass one pitted limestone boulder. There's no echo, but a squirrel does scold you from a tree. That counts. A quirky tidbit you stumble across. Some garden manuals from the Ming Dynasty advised matching your rock to your emotional state. Feeling restless? Find a stone with many holes. Let the wind carry your worries through. Heartbroken? Seek a cracked stone so you can pour your sadness into it. Just want a snack? Well, maybe don't eat the rocks. You pass a low table set between two oddly symmetrical stones. In the past, this might have been a place for silent tea, an actual meditative practice where friends would sit and sip without speaking, letting the garden carry the conversation. Can you imagine doing that today? No phones, no talking, just the ambient wisdom of a really old rock. Some fringe scholars claim this kind of ritual tea silence helped ancient minds access stone consciousness, an idea loosely based on animist traditions and loosely ignored by serious historians. But hey, it's kind of fun to imagine the rock listening to your thoughts and politely nodding. You keep walking and now the stones shift again. These ones seem almost shy, half buried, peeking out from mossy ground, hidden beneath low shrubs. One resembles the edge of a whale's back breaching through a sea of ferns. Another looks like a broken fan tucked into the roots of a plum tree. This subtlety is no accident. Song Dynasty garden designers believed that a rock's true power came from suggestion. It wasn't about declaring, "This is a mountain," but hinting, "Maybe this feels like a mountain if you close your eyes and squint." The idea was to provoke the imagination without dictating it. The same way a lullaby doesn't explain every detail, it just wraps you in a feeling. So now here you are, surrounded by humble, whispering stones, each one placed by a hand long gone, each one waiting to say nothing in particular, and everything, if you're quiet enough. You sit again, this time on a rock bench carved so smooth it might as well be soap. A breeze rustles through the garden. Bamboo leaves tap lightly like wind chimes. In the distance, a koi splashes once, then goes still, and for a moment you feel it, that tug of timelessness, that stillness wrapped in stone, that sleepy little voice that says, "Don't move just yet, stay here, let the rocks talk a while longer." The path curls again, this time along a narrow channel of water so still it looks like polished jade. On either side, stones jut out, not in a chaotic pile, but in a deliberate sequence. They look almost like stepping stones, but too far apart to be useful. You pause. You're meant to look, not leap. This section of the garden was known as a water scroll, a flowing composition where rocks serve as brushstrokes. Ancient Chinese gardeners believed that moving water was the lifeblood of any garden, and rocks were its skeleton. Together they created not just a landscape, but a living painting. And right now, you're standing inside one. Some of the larger rocks here are weathered smooth, their curves echoing the flow of the water beside them. Others rise in vertical sheets, like frozen waterfalls. You spot one that's bright white and veined with black, likely a piece of Taihu stone, famous for its wrinkled texture and natural perforations. It looks like a giant, crumpled scroll someone left beside the stream to dry. Back in the Ming Dynasty, these stones were often compared to ancient sages, stoic, worn, and wise from centuries of river erosion. One popular joke in old poetry: "He speaks like Taihu stone full of holes, yet profound." You're not sure if that's a compliment or an insult, but either way, it sounds deep. You notice a stone placed partially in the water, half submerged like it couldn't decide whether to commit. This placement wasn't accidental. It was meant to create tension, a visual yin and yang between movement and stillness, solid and fluid, land and reflection. The Taoists loved that sort of paradox. You, on the other hand, are mostly impressed that someone had the patience to position a boulder with millimeter precision and not fall in. Historians still argue whether the water features in these gardens served a more symbolic function, perhaps representing the flow of time or the continuity between heaven and earth, or were simply a practical way to keep the fish happy and the air cool in summer. Maybe both, maybe neither. The truth, like the water, flows around interpretation. You lean over the edge of the water now, watching as golden koi fish drift between lily pads. A flash of orange here, a flicker of white there. One fish even has a mark shaped like a question mark on its side, as if it too is pondering why this rock sits where it does. A small bridge of flat stones leads you to the next garden room. These stepping stones, known as flying steps, weren't just functional, they were designed to force you to slow down, literally. Their spacing is just awkward enough that you can't rush. You have to think about each step, which means you have to be present. It's garden mindfulness, baked right into the walk. As you cross, you glance down and notice something odd. A single red stone among the grays. It's a subtle contrast, but intentional. In Chinese culture, red is the color of vitality and luck. Placing one red stone in a field of monochrome was a way to spark joy and energy like a firefly in a cave, or a sprinkle of chili on a bowl of congee. Suddenly, the whole path feels warmer, a quirky tidbit for your mental treasure chest. Some historical gardens would hide a tiny carved poem under one of the stepping stones. Just one, not to be read aloud, but to be felt by the foot and idea known as silent verse. The poem would be etched so shallow that only centuries of wear might bring it into full view. Imagine designing art for people who wouldn't see it until your great-great-great-grandkids showed up with a pressure washer. You reach the other side of the water scroll and find yourself in a more open area now. Here, the rocks stand tall, arranged in clusters. Some groups look like mountain peaks, others like animal silhouettes. One grouping forms a rough triangle known as the Three Friends configuration. Each rock in this trio represents a quality: strength, humility, and resilience. You're not sure which is which, but the one that's leaning sideways probably has resilience down pat. Gardeners often gave their rocks poetic names: Sleeping Dragon, Lonely Monk, Crane Looking Back. These names weren't always literal, just emotional cues. So next time you see a mossy chunk of limestone and think it resembles a duck who's lost its way home, congrats! You've entered the ancient tradition of stone poetry. You sit now on a wooden bench tucked beside one of these rock clusters. The bench is old, lacquer worn smooth by thousands of thoughtful pauses. In front of you, a flat rock has been carved with barely visible characters, something about stillness and clouds. You run your fingers over them, not trying to read, just feeling the groove, and that's when it happens. Not a big epiphany, just a soft exhale from your brain, like your thoughts have unclenched a little. You look up. A bird lands on one of the tallest rocks, pauses for a full 5 seconds, then flies off. It doesn't sing. It doesn't need to. The rock, somehow, has already said enough. You rise from the bench and begin to follow a narrow footpath, gently curling through a thicket of bamboo. Each stalk creaks faintly in the breeze, like 1,000 sleepy metronomes ticking out of sync. As you walk, your fingers brush the smooth green surface of a few stalks, and you wonder, briefly, how many visitors before you have done the same. probably enough to polish the canes like river stones. Suddenly the bamboo clears, and you step into a new garden room dominated not by rock formations or water, but by a single massive stone platform, slightly raised and perfectly flat. It's bordered by jagged rocks on all sides, like punctuation marks around a silent sentence. This, you realize, is a viewing terrace. From here, you're meant to pause and take in a deliberate vista. Not a panoramic mountain view. No, this is subtler. A framed scene, a rocky hill in the distance, a cluster of willows bending in slow motion, a tiny pagoda roof peeking just above the treetops. This wasn't nature left wild. It was nature gently edited. In ancient Chinese garden design, these composed views were called borrowed scenes. It's a bit like stealing, but politely. Gardeners would align a rock or tree just so to make the distant hill, temple, or sky feel like part of the garden, even if it wasn't. In essence, they curated illusions, tricking your eye into believing the world was smaller, tidier, and more poetic than it really was. Honestly, it's the same logic behind cropping your vacation photos to exclude the gift shop. Historians still argue whether borrowed scenes were primarily spiritual devices meant to connect the inner and outer worlds, or simply clever design techniques to make small gardens seem vast. Either way, it's pretty genius. Who needs more land when you can just borrow a mountain? You sit cross-legged on the platform, staring out at the curated landscape, and notice something quietly impressive. There's no symmetry, not even a whiff of it. Western gardens, think Versailles, or your neighbor's over-mulched lawn prize neat lines and mirrored flower beds. But Chinese gardens rebelled against that. They wanted imperfection, unevenness, the illusion of natural randomness, which, ironically, took incredible planning. The rock hill you're facing, for instance, it's not centered. It's off to the left. The pagoda roof doesn't rise above it, but slightly behind it, barely visible. The trees arc toward the right. It's a visual haiku, where every element is chosen for how it disrupts balance. As the old designers believed, too perfect is too dead. A fun fact: some elite garden builders would actually stage falling leaves or scatter pebbles in patterns that looked accidental. They called it crafted spontaneity, which is just a fancy way of saying, yes, I organized that moss. Now you lie back on the stone platform. It's surprisingly warm from the sun, but it holds the coolness of centuries beneath. Your head rests on your hands as your eyes follow a thin wisp of cloud threading across the sky. A breeze moves through the garden, and with it, a distant sound, a soft rustle, like silk being folded. There's a legend, half fact, half poem, that some garden stones were selected not just for how they looked, but how they sounded. Certain porous limestones from Lake Taihu would sing faintly when struck by raindrops or rubbed by hand. Gardeners believed these rocks had voices, old and patient ones, and that by listening, you might catch a whisper of ancient wisdom. You reach out and tap the edge of the nearest stone. Nothing dramatic happens, just a tiny clink. Still, for a brief moment, you wonder if the stone remembers you, or at least notices. The path ahead draws you downward, into a more shaded part of the garden. The temperature cools, the light dims. Here, the rocks are darker, rougher, less picturesque, more primal. This was the inner realm, where garden designers wanted to evoke the sensation of a mountain forest without requiring anyone to break a sweat climbing one. It's here that the rocks take on more sculptural forms. One slab resembles a dragon spine. Another curls like the wave of a breaking sea. You pass a towering boulder that looks uncannily like a face in profile, eyes closed. Whether intentional or a trick of erosion, it's arresting. Like the garden itself is dreaming beside you. You sit once more, this time on a stone stool carved into a natural pedestal. Before you lies a small flat table, also stone, and on it, someone has laid an open scroll. Wait, not a scroll. A carved stone slab that resembles one. The imitation is so delicate, it almost fools your sleepy brain. This is no accident. Chinese rock gardeners often mimicked not just forms of nature, but human objects. Rocks that looked like scrolls, inkstones, even a scholar's cap. They called them literary rocks, and they weren't meant to be used, only imagined. A stone that could be a desk, a boulder that might be a bookshelf. Fantasy in mineral form. And here you are, staring at a fake scroll you cannot read, on a fake desk you cannot use, in a garden designed to feel both wild and staged. It should be absurd. Instead, it feels strangely soothing, like playing a role in a dream you didn't write but desperately needed to have. One last glance at the horizon, and you catch sight of a crane flying in the distance. Its long legs trail like commas. Its wings slice silently through the air, then disappear behind the silhouette of a mountain you suspect is not really part of the garden. Another borrowed view. But it worked. You believed it. You still do. You rise slowly from the stone stool, joints a little stiffer than you remember. The garden feels different now, not colder, not darker, but deeper somehow, like you've slipped beneath its surface. The silence has weight. Even the bird song seems to pause, respectfully, as if the trees asked for quiet. The path narrows again, curling between moss-covered rocks and low-hanging branches. You duck slightly, brushing aside a cluster of leaves so delicately they don't even rustle. Your fingers trail along a rough stone wall that seems to grow from the earth rather than sit atop it. It's a wall, sure, but it's also sculpture designed to look like the ruins of something ancient, something forgotten. It's a little trick Chinese gardeners loved, building structures that appeared older than they really were. This wasn't deception, it was atmosphere. Just like a haunted house adds creaking floorboards and cobwebs for effect, a classical Chinese garden might include fake ruins to evoke nostalgia, impermanence, or a connection to vanished dynasties. Some historians still argue whether this trend began as rebellion against court perfectionism or simply a yearning for the rustic and worn. Either way, you're standing in it now, and you can feel time thickening around your ankles like mist. Around the next bend, you find another courtyard, but this one's different. Gone are the grand pavilions and wide open spaces. This one is intimate, almost secretive. A single pine tree twists up through the stone tiles, its roots pushing into view like skeletal fingers. There's a low stone basin in one corner, filled with still water. You peer into it, expecting your reflection, and yes, there you are, tired eyes and all. But behind you, in the reflection, there's something else. A rock shaped like a mountain, small, jagged, and unmistakably deliberate. This is a penjing stone. You've probably heard of bonsai tiny trees grown in trays to mimic full forests. Penjing is its older Chinese cousin. But instead of just trees, it's a miniature landscape, and the rock you're looking at now, it isn't just shaped like a mountain, it is the mountain, in metaphor. A stand-in, a compression of distance, of elevation, of journey. Ancient scholars would sit and study these stones the way we binge documentaries or lose hours to satellite maps. Whole stories lived in these tiny peaks. The quirky bit? Some collectors were so obsessed they gave their penjing stones names like pets. One 12th century official reportedly named his prized stone Lonely Cloud at Dusk. Another preferred Broken Peak with the Scent of Rain. And yes, these names were sometimes carved into their wooden bases like trophy plaques. You bend down for a closer look, noting the way lichen clings to the rock's ridges, like tiny alpine forests. The longer you stare, the more it feels like you're looking up at it, not down. This illusion, this inversion of scale, was precisely the point. Ancient Chinese aesthetics loved paradoxes, the massive in the miniature, the wild in the tame, the fleeting in the permanent. A stone can be a poem. A rock can be a world. Beside the basin sits a low wooden bench, perfectly weathered, probably treated with oils that smell faintly of sandalwood and rain. You sit there now, listening. Nothing dramatic, just the hush of wind in pine needles, the whisper of a koi's fin disturbing water somewhere nearby. Speaking of koi, you follow the sound to a small moon gate, perfectly round and barely shoulder wide. You duck through it and step into what feels like a different garden entirely. A shallow pond stretches before you, its surface broken only by lily pads and the occasional ripple from below. The fish here are enormous, gold, red, white. They glide silently, like living brushstrokes. You kneel by the edge, watching as one koi circles toward you. Its scales shimmer like lacquered armor. You've heard stories half myth, half truth about koi swimming upstream for decades to become dragons. That's probably not biologically sound, but hey, neither is believing that rocks can sing or that mountains can fit in a teacup. Still, you stare at the koi and feel something stir admiration, maybe? Envy? They live in a curated paradise, endlessly looping the same pond, yet with the dignity of creatures who believe they're navigating the cosmos. A low bridge stretches across the water, barely 2 feet wide, its stones spaced unevenly to force deliberate, careful steps. These were called stepping stone paths, and they weren't just functional, they were philosophy. The idea was simple: walk slower, think longer, notice more. Each stone was a pause, a choice. Honestly, it's a garden version of mindfulness meditation. As you cross the bridge, your footsteps echo faintly against the stone-soft, hollow taps that sync with your breath. There's no rail, no handhold, just you, the pond, the koi, and the awareness of your own weight. You can't scroll past this moment, you have to live it. On the other side, a low pavilion leans slightly over the pond, held up by carved stone posts. You step inside and realize the windows are more than just holes in the wall. They're frames. Each window opens onto a specific view. A pine here, a rock there, a piece of sky. It's like flipping through the pages of a slow-moving picture book. Some historians believe these viewing pavilions weren't just for gazing, they were for composing. Scholars would sit and write poems inspired by whatever framed scene the window offered. If the light changed, or the breeze stirred a branch just right, it might trigger a metaphor worth preserving. And if it didn't, well, at least the koi were nice. You stretch out on the bench inside the pavilion, letting the warm scent of old wood and algae wrap around you like a blanket. The roof creaks occasionally, not in a spooky way, just enough to remind you it's real, that this entire place is real, and yet it still feels like fiction. Like a bedtime story built from moss and mineral. Your eyes drift to the edge of the pond, where another rock, this one squat, pockmarked, oddly shaped, sits like a punctuation mark at the water's edge. You tilt your head. It looks a little like a sleeping turtle. The turtle-shaped rock seems to smirk at you, as if it knows something you don't. You chuckle softly under your breath. It's just a stone, of course. But then again, in this garden, nothing is just anything. That's the rule. Everything has 2 identities, what it is and what it evokes. And tonight, that stone is a sleepy turtle, sunning itself beside a quiet pond, content to be misunderstood. You rise from the pavilion and re-enter the winding pathways. The garden seems to shift around you, subtly reshaping itself. You take another turn left, then right, and arrive at a corridor lined with latticework screens. Sunlight filters through in fractured patterns, dappling the stone tiles beneath your feet like soft embroidery. The air feels warmer here, and the scent of blooming plum blossoms lingers, delicate and just a touch melancholy. In traditional Chinese gardens, corridors weren't just for getting from point A to point B. They were emotional instruments. Their shadows moved with the day, changing the mood with the light. Their walls offered glimpses rather than panoramas, just enough to tease the imagination. And every so often, a small window would open onto a rock or a tree, making it feel not like a garden, but a series of paintings you happen to be walking through. Historians still argue whether these visual slices were meant to honor classical landscape paintings, or whether the paintings themselves were trying to imitate gardens, a chicken or egg puzzle that's gone unsolved for centuries. But in either case, the harmony between art and landscape is deliberate. You don't look at this garden, you read it. Ahead of you now is a wall unlike the others. It's curved, wavy, almost serpentine. Almost. This is a cloud wall, or sometimes called a dragon wall, depending on who's translating. The undulating form isn't just decorative. It breaks up monotony, creates visual rhythm, and mimics the natural movements of hills and rivers. You run your fingers along its surface. It's cool, just slightly damp from the morning mist, and its plaster is flecked with tiny bits of shell or mica that catch the light when you move. As you follow the curve, you begin to hear something. A soft babble. Not a crowd, not a fountain. It's a stream. You didn't notice it before, but now you see it. A narrow ribbon of water winding through the rocks like a silver thread in a tapestry. It's artificial, of course, but built to seem spontaneous, like a stream that stumbled into the garden by accident and decided to stay. You crouch beside it and dip your fingers into the current. It's colder than you expect. The water loops around miniature bridges and beneath tiny stone archways. These weren't just cute, they had a deeper meaning. Water symbolized flow, life, energy, and even wisdom. It connected the garden's various rooms, tying everything together, not just spatially, but spiritually. A garden with still water is thoughtful. A garden with running water is alive. There's a bridge ahead, narrow and crooked on purpose, of course. Straight lines are rare in these gardens. They're seen as aggressive, rigid, unfeeling. The zigzag bridge is an old trick. Legend has it that evil spirits can only travel in straight lines, so a bridge that twists and turns keeps them from following you. Whether or not you believe in spirits, the bridge does force you to walk slower, watch your footing, and maybe, just maybe, feel more present in your body. Halfway across, you pause and lean against the carved stone railing. Beneath you, the stream splits into two. One fork disappears into a dark bamboo grove. The other flows into a small, circular pool, surrounded by tall rocks that seem to lean inward like gossiping monks. You smile at the thought. This is what the Chinese called borrowed scenery. It's a principle where gardens steal views from outside their own borders. Maybe a distant hill is framed by a window. Maybe a patch of sky is reflected just right. In this case, the grove and the rocks beyond aren't even part of the main garden, but they've been visually claimed by the designer through clever placement. It's like a magician making you believe the rabbit was in the hat all along. Not all borrowed scenery came from nature. Some gardens incorporated rooftops, temples, even entire cityscapes in the background, turning mundane surroundings into poetic assets. Historians still debate whether this was an act of humility, of turning the outside world into art, or just clever landscaping with a good sense of marketing. Either way, it worked. You pass under an archway now, low and circular, shaped like a coin, another symbolic gesture. The Chinese garden is full of these visual puns. A square base with a circular top? That's heaven and earth in balance. A stone placed beside a gnarled tree? That's strength and flexibility sharing space. Nothing was random, even if it looked like it. Suddenly, a breeze picks up. Not strong, but insistent. You feel it sweep across your skin like a silk scarf. It rustles the bamboo, ripples the pond, and makes the hanging lanterns above your head tremble ever so slightly. You tilt your face toward it and close your eyes. For a moment, you're nowhere. No thoughts, just wind. When you open your eyes again, you notice something new, an alcove, barely noticeable, hidden beneath a large overhanging roof. Inside, a table and 2 stone stools, carved with floral motifs and aged to perfection. You step inside. The roof above you is latticed to allow in dappled light, and there, sitting in the center of the table, is a single blackened inkstone. It's dry now, but you can almost see the ghost of water and ink swirling on its surface. This was once a scholar's writing nook, a place where poetry wasn't just written, but grown, like the moss on the rocks or the branches of the pines. You sit down gently, not to write, but to listen. There's a silence in this corner that feels different from the rest of the garden. Not emptiness, but fullness held in suspension. The way a breath is held right before you speak. You touch the inkstone with one finger, and for a second, you imagine the scholar who once sat here, brush poised, writing about that same breeze you just felt. A few paces from the inkstone nook, the path takes a sudden, sharp turn. You blink. A rock jutting straight into the walkway blocks your view beyond. Not an obstacle exactly, more like a punctuation mark, an intentional pause in your stroll. Chinese garden designers loved these unexpected interruptions. They called it dodge and reveal. You weren't meant to see everything all at once. You were meant to discover it, slowly, deliberately, like peeling back silk. You step around the rock, curiosity stirred, and emerge into what looks like a hidden courtyard. It's quieter here, sheltered by tall walls and thick clusters of bamboo. A pool rests in the center, its surface still, holding the reflection of a single plum blossom petal as it floats. You watch it spin gently in circles. For a moment you swear time has slowed to match its pace. At the edge of the pool sits a structure that could almost be mistaken for a humble shed. But this is no storage space. It's a tea pavilion. And in the world of Chinese gardens, tea wasn't just a drink. It was a philosophy. Every detail here, the worn stone threshold, the dark wood beams, even the angle of the sunlight that hits the floorboards, was arranged for contemplation. You step inside. The wooden floor creaks softly under your weight. Light seeps in through a paper window, giving the whole room a buttery glow. There's a low table set in the corner, and beside it a series of delicate clay cups. Each is slightly different, imperfect, which of course is perfect. Chinese aesthetics prized asymmetry, believing that true beauty lay in what was irregular, incomplete, even flawed. You pour yourself an imaginary cup. The ritual unspools, warm water, fragrant leaves, the rise of steam like a ghost escaping a story. You sip slowly, not because the tea is hot, but because rushing would betray the whole point. In this space, the act of drinking tea becomes an act of paying attention. And attention here is everything. Historians still argue whether these tea houses were primarily for solitary reflection or subtle social maneuvering, a space for quiet philosophy or veiled politics, probably both. In imperial times, some gardens were used to host powerful guests, not in the grand banquet sense, but with whispered influence. A stroll by the rockery here, a compliment about plum blossoms there. Deals sealed with silence. Outside again, the courtyard feels different, more personal. You notice something strange. The path curves away from the center rather than toward it. In Western gardens, paths often guide you to a focal point. But here, it's the opposite. The path pulls you along the edges, teasing you with views you almost see. It's like the garden is shy, only showing its best parts when it feels you've earned them. You walk on, and the sounds begin to shift. The rustling leaves give way to the distant coo of doves. Somewhere nearby, wind chimes clink with an uneven rhythm, high, low, then a pause. You round another corner, and suddenly, you're in a moon gate, a perfect circle cut into the wall, framing the scene beyond like a painting. You can't help but smile. The moon gate was more than just pretty. It symbolized unity and harmony, and walking through it was like stepping into another world. Garden designers used it to frame surprises, places of poetry, intimacy, or revelation. And tonight, what lies beyond your moon gate is a small stage. Literally, a stage made of stone, shaped in a half moon, facing rows of short stools under open sky. This wasn't for loud theater. It was for something gentler, the reading of poems, the playing of guqin, the soft murmur of storytelling under the stars. You sit on one of the stools, its surface cool and dimpled. Above you, the branches part just enough to show a sliver of moon. You imagine a garden owner from the 15th century seated right where you are. In one hand, a scroll of Tang Dynasty verses. In the other, a wine cup carved from jade. Around him, friends and philosophers, each offering a line of poetry or a playful jab about who can find the best metaphor for the rock shaped like a goat. It's hard to say what was more prized, the poetry or the banter. Ancient letters describe evenings of refined nonsense where nothing was solved, but everything was enjoyed. And the garden, this soft cradle of stone and water and leafy silence, held it all without judgment. You rise from the stool and wander past the stage, feet brushing over pebbles arranged like tiny galaxies. The sky's darker now. The garden lamps flicker on, their warm light catching the edges of leaves, casting slow-moving shadows on the plaster walls. One of those shadows moves oddly. Not spooky, just unexpected. You follow it and find another scholar's nook, this one tucked into a cluster of camellia bushes, nearly invisible unless you know to look. The roof here is so low you have to duck. The bench inside is worn smooth, and the walls are etched with faint calligraphy. You sit down, not to write, but to listen again. This time, not to the wind or water, but to absence, to the gentle hush between the notes. To the space the garden leaves unfilled, so that your imagination can step in and finish the picture. Historians still debate whether this emphasis on emptiness came from Taoist philosophy, Zen influence, or sheer spatial genius. Most likely, all of the above. In Chinese garden design, void wasn't lack, it was invitation. You lean back on the bench. Through the narrow opening in the wall, you spot a rock shaped like a crane. It stands alone, tall and lean, next to a pine that twists like it's dancing with gravity. The two don't touch, but their nearness feels deliberate-like, a story that never gets told out loud. A light drizzle begins, soft, irregular taps on the roof tiles above you. The smell of wet earth rises. Somewhere in the distance, a frog makes a single unhurried sound, the kind of sound that doesn't need an answer. You close your eyes. The drizzle fades into mist, and the air settles like velvet around you. You step out from the scholar's nook, your fingertips brushing the damp bamboo leaves. The path is slick, the pebbles glistening faintly in the garden lantern's flicker. As you move forward, your breath forms tiny clouds in the cooling night air. You're no longer walking in a garden, you're inside a poem. To your left, a corridor appears, roofed with dark tiles, supported by wooden beams the color of roasted chestnut. This is a covered walkway, or lang. You slip beneath it, grateful for its shelter. The roof is low enough to feel cozy, but high enough not to crowd. These walkways, more than just passageways, are threads that stitch the entire garden together, function meeting form. Practicality dressed in beauty. What's clever, though, is how the walkway's windows' little wooden cutouts in the wall shaped like fans, bats, or flowers frame the landscape in slices. As you stroll, you see the garden not as one whole, but as a series of shifting paintings. A pine tree here, the tip of a scholar's rock there, and once, for just a moment, the curve of a stone bridge half lost in fog. The walkway makes the garden feel infinite, because you never see more than a part at a time. You stop at a window shaped like a plum blossom and peek out. Rain droplets cling to the petals of the real plum tree beyond, catching the lantern light like tiny stars. In the reflection of the water beneath it, the blossom doubles above and below, reality and illusion, a perfect mirrored moment. A curious detail, these walkways almost always zigzag. Straight paths were considered dull, predictable. But a meandering path? That mirrored the journey of life, or so the scholars said. Historians still argue whether the zigzag design served symbolic, practical, or aesthetic purposes. Possibly, it helped avoid evil spirits, which were believed to only move in straight lines. You chuckle softly. Whether for ghosts or guests, it certainly keeps you engaged. You reach the end of the corridor and find yourself on a small bridge arching over a narrow stream. The water below moves lazily, trailing small leaves like forgotten notes. A fish, a bright orange koi, flickers beneath the surface, then vanishes beneath a water lily. The bridge is just wide enough for one person and made of stone so weathered it looks almost soft. Bridges in these gardens weren't for transportation. They were pauses, midpoints, places to stop, breathe, and admire the journey. And they were never perfectly symmetrical again, that love for imperfection. One side of the bridge might slope steeper or have a different texture. The designers weren't trying to control your experience, they were trying to provoke it. You lean on the stone railing, watching as another koi circles below. Just behind you, a weeping willow sways gently, its fingers brushing the stream's surface like it's trying to write something secret on the water. You could stay here forever, but the garden has more to share. You descend the far side of the bridge, and the path leads you to what seems like a clearing, except in the middle of it, there's a towering rock, a craggy, almost violent shape, twice your height. This isn't the refined, balanced rock from earlier. This one is wild, almost menacing. Some called them fantastic rocks, others dreamstones. The best were prized for their grotesque shape, full of holes and unexpected angles. They weren't meant to be pretty. They were meant to challenge. This one looks like it's yawning, or screaming, or maybe just laughing at something you don't understand. You reach out to touch its surface. It's rough, pitted, ancient. You wonder if the gardener who placed it here argued with himself about the angle, whether to turn it 5 degrees to the left or tilt it so the morning light hit just so. These rocks were obsessed over displayed like sculptures, given names, even featured in art catalogs. Historians still debate whether this fixation came from Taoist mountain worship, Confucian symbolism, or sheer aesthetic madness. But in any case, the garden became a gallery, and the stones became its stars. Behind the dreamstone, you find a shadowy alcove with a stone bench. On the wall, faint outlines of brush-painted bamboo, barely visible in the dim light. You sit again, your legs grateful for the pause. The air here is cooler. You can smell the faint sweetness of osmanthus flowers, their perfume strongest at night. It's said these tiny blossoms can scent an entire courtyard. Tonight, they seem to be scenting your memory. Somewhere to your right, you hear laughter. Not human, but the high, trickling laugh of a small waterfall. You rise and follow the sound, ducking through a half-moon doorway into a pocket-sized grotto. The water tumbles down from an unseen height, vanishing into a pool ringed with moss. There's a tiny lantern beside it, shaped like a pagoda. It glows faintly, its reflection rippling on the water's surface. Water was life in Chinese gardens, but also metaphor, a symbol of adaptability, of flow, of time. The waterfall here is small, but deliberate. The designers could have made it bigger, grander, but then it wouldn't whisper. It would shout. And this garden doesn't shout. It murmurs, coaxes, teases. Even the waterfall has restraint. You sit by the pool. The water's voice becomes rhythmic, like breath. You begin to match it. Inhale, exhale. Even the koi beneath the surface seem to move in slow motion. One of them brushes the underside of a floating petal. No splash, just a ripple. Some ancient texts claim that a true scholar could meditate beside such a pool until he forgot the boundaries of his body. He'd become part of the water, or the moss, or the rock. You doubt that's happening to you, but still you feel less solid than before, more fluid, more dream. As you rise, the waterfall's whisper follows you, a kind of blessing, a secret shared. You continue your journey, not with urgency, but with quiet expectation. You step away from the waterfall, shoes scuffing softly on the smooth stone path, and your eyes lift toward a tall, moon-gate archway ahead. The circle is perfect, like a coin or a full moon rising above the garden floor. As you pass through it, the sound behind you dulls, and for a moment, you feel like you've entered a different world. Not just a new room, but a new atmosphere. Moon gates were often symbolic thresholds, ritual passages between spaces, times, or moods. And in this garden, passing through one feels like slipping into a new chapter of the dream. The space beyond is strangely open. A broad courtyard, empty save for a few scattered pebbles and an ancient ginkgo tree in the center. Its leaves, fan-shaped and pale gold, flutter down like soft applause. You crouch to pick one up. It smells faintly of sunlight and paper. Around the edges of the courtyard, a few garden pavilions stand quietly, their wooden eaves curved like smiles. You choose one that looks especially inviting, painted red, with green lattice windows, and step inside. Inside, it's dim, but not dark. The light filters through patterned window screens, dappling the stone floor like fish scales. You find a wooden chair beside a table, both lacquered and carved with dragons so intricate they seem to slither when the candle flickers. You sit and rest your arms on the cool surface. Pavilions like this were never meant to dominate the garden. They weren't palaces, they were pauses, designed for sipping tea, composing a line of poetry, or simply watching the rain paint circles in the pond outside. Some had names like the Studio of Drifting Fragrance, or the Hall of Embroidered Clouds. Poetic names for poetic places. In the corner, a zither sits untouched. Dust clings to its strings like a hush. You imagine the soft notes once drifting across this very space. You close your eyes and try to hear them, but then your nose twitches. Incense, light and woody. You follow the scent to a small alcove at the back of the pavilion. A low altar sits here, with a single coil of incense burning slowly, its spiral releasing tendrils of fragrant smoke into the air. The scent is sandalwood, or maybe agar wood. It's hard to tell, but comforting all the same. These altars weren't for worship, usually. They were more like mood setters. Garden designers believed in stimulating every sense. Sight, sound, smell, even taste if you brought tea. And smell? That was the most subtle and sneaky of all. Incense could open the door to memory, calm the breath, slow the mind. You inhale again. Time bends slightly. Not far from the pavilion, you step into a rockery, a maze of jagged stones forming miniature valleys, caves, and ridges. It's almost playful, like a playground designed for philosophers. The stones shift the space around you, narrowing the path, widening it again, sometimes tricking you into thinking you're lost. A child would sprint through here. A scholar would get delightfully disoriented. This is no accident. These miniature mountains and valleys were designed to be explored slowly, feet shuffling on purpose. They mimic the landscape of southern China, the karst peaks and misty hills, but in pocket-sized form. Every curve of stone is intentional. Every crevice hides a surprise. A moss patch here, a fern frond there, maybe even a frog if you're lucky. Historians still argue whether these rockeries were meant to evoke Taoist immortality mountains, Buddhist meditative paths, or just the sheer fun of wandering. Whatever the truth, you can't help but grin as you wind your way through, ducking under a low stone arch and emerging into a sudden burst of moonlight. You're back at a pond, but not the same one as before. This one is broader, and at its edge, an odd little platform juts out into the water. It's shaped like a zigzag lightning bolt, floating just above the lily pads. You step onto it cautiously. The stone is cool underfoot. This is a zigzag bridge, a rare and delightful invention. It seems chaotic at first, all sharp angles and jarring turns. But that's the point. The bridge forces you to slow down, to turn every few steps, to see the water and your reflection from a dozen different angles. A frog croaks once, then silence again. The garden designers believed in interruption, not the annoying kind, but the kind that pulls you out of habit. A zigzag path isn't just about where you're going, it's about noticing how you're going. Halfway across the bridge, you pause. The water below is perfectly still. You can see the moon reflected there, slightly trembling, as if it's floating on gelatin. A few dragonflies buzz low, their wings almost invisible. One hovers close to your hand and then darts away as if embarrassed. You finish the bridge and step onto a gravel island. In the center stands a lone tree, small and spindly, but unmistakable, a bonsai pine. You kneel beside it, examining the twists in its branches, the way its roots grip the soil like tiny fists. This tree has been shaped for decades, maybe centuries. Every bend, every tilt, every gnarled twist is a conversation between the tree and its gardener. In China, bonsai are called penjing, and they aren't just tiny trees, they're microcosms, little universes in a pot. A single penjing might tell the story of a mountain pass, a lone monk's journey, or a tragic poem. Their artworks grown slowly, year after year, with infinite patience. The fringe detail? Some scholars say penjing was once used to mourn lost landscapes. When a scholar was exiled or a mountain temple destroyed, he might recreate it in miniature as both tribute and therapy. You gently brush a pine needle from the branch and watch it fall. Time, in this garden, moves at the speed of a falling leaf. You leave the bonsai pine behind, still feeling the lingering gravity of its miniature grandeur, and follow another winding path. This one curves with an almost serpentine elegance through low shrubs and garden walls. Overhead, paper lanterns sway gently from bamboo poles, their light diffused into a pale golden mist. One flickers slightly, probably not haunted, but hey, who's to say? The wall beside you isn't just a boundary, it's decorated in an unexpected way, with carefully embedded ceramic plates, scalloped tiles, and cutouts in the shapes of butterflies, gourds, and bats. Yes, bats. In Chinese symbolism, bats bring good fortune. They're called fu, which also means blessing, a little wordplay, a little superstition. Welcome to the garden. As you trace your hand along the cool stone wall, you come to a strange window, except it's not glass. It's an opening in a lattice pattern carved from stone. These are leek windows, or tu jing, designed not to show a view clearly, but to suggest one. You peek through one shaped like a plum blossom and see a white crane statue standing in the next courtyard, half obscured by drifting mist. The idea here is subtlety. The garden is never supposed to give everything away at once. Like a poem, it unfolds in layers. These windows offer hints, not answers, glimpses of what's to come or what might be. One scholar once compared them to flirtation, always suggesting, never revealing too much. Moving on, you arrive at a narrow corridor lined with intricate pebble mosaics. You slow down again. The floor beneath you is made of smooth stones, arranged into spirals, clouds, and waves. They massage the soles of your feet through your thin shoes. In some gardens, it was believed that these paths promoted health. A walking reflexology session, though, honestly, some of the stones feel suspiciously like pebbly torture devices. You pause at a mosaic shaped like a tiger's eye. It's so precisely made, the colors so carefully arranged, that it looks alive. A little unsettling, like the floor is watching you. Your footsteps bring you to a gentle rise. At the top, a small open terrace reveals a view of the garden you've traversed so far. Rocks, trees, ponds, pavilions, all arranged with a logic that feels almost dreamlike. It doesn't mimic nature, it translates it, and the result is something more emotional than realistic. There's an old anecdote, possibly true, possibly invented, that when a visiting official once asked a Suzhou gardener what the garden was for, the gardener replied, "For standing here and feeling exactly what you're feeling now." Beneath the terrace is a shadowy grotto. You descend stone steps into the cool air, and the moisture gathers instantly on your arms. The rocks are glistening, and the ceiling is low enough to brush your head if you're not careful. You duck instinctively. Inside, a tiny waterfall trickles from a crevice in the wall. It sounds different here, amplified and echoed into 1,000 watery whispers. The grotto is full of echoes, but also silence, and you can't quite tell which is louder. A cluster of jade figurines sits on a stone shelf, turtles, cranes, a toad with 3 legs. That one's a symbol of wealth. The others? Longevity and wisdom. There's an incense burner nearby, long cold, and a pair of calligraphy scrolls hanging where the damp hasn't eaten through the ink. You squint to read them and recognize the character for stillness. Stillness, the ultimate theme of many gardens. Not just quiet, but inner stillness. The kind that lingers in your body like heat after sunlight. You sit for a while, just breathing. The grotto is a kind of sensory chamber. No color, but gray. No sound but water. No movement but your breath. And for a moment, maybe less, you forget what time it is. You climb back out, blinking into daylight or moonlight. It's hard to tell anymore. The garden bends time, warps it a little. A stone bench appears, and you welcome the excuse to sit. Above you, wisteria vines drip purple blooms from a trellis, their scent thick and dreamy. Bees have gone to sleep, but a moth flits by like a piece of floating ash. This particular corner of the garden is rumored again, maybe just whispered by guides to be designed for heartbreak. There's a weeping willow nearby, and a koi pond with a single white fish. Just one. Apparently, the story goes, a scholar came here every day for years after his beloved passed and fed that single fish as if it were the embodiment of their shared soul. Historians still argue whether the tale is true, but the garden doesn't care. It feels true, and that's enough. You toss a tiny pebble into the pond. The ripple expands slowly, lazily, across the surface. The koi doesn't flinch. It glides under a lotus leaf, disappearing from view like a whispered name. You lean back, letting the scent of wisteria lull you. The night air is a little cooler now, and somewhere nearby, a nightjar chirps once, an unexpected broken note. In the distance, the silhouette of a bamboo grove shivers in the breeze. Bamboo always fascinated garden designers, not just for its flexibility, but for its sound. When wind moves through a bamboo stand, it clicks and taps like 1,000 wooden wind chimes performing a ghostly rhythm. In winter, when the stalks contract in the cold, they sometimes crack like firecrackers. You walk toward the grove, footsteps muffled by the carpet of fallen leaves. A small stone stele stands at the entrance, engraved with a poem in ancient characters. You recognize only a few symbols: wind, moon, shadow, and something that might mean regret, or maybe dew. The line between emotion and weather is blurry in Chinese poetry. Maybe that's the point. You run your fingers along the smooth bamboo trunks as you pass, feeling the faint ridges of growth. Each section marks time. Some people count the segments like tree rings, measuring lives in inches. At the end of the grove, a lantern flickers to life. No wires, no modern tricks, just fire, dancing behind silk. It sways gently, illuminating a curved wooden bridge ahead. You follow. The curved bridge stretches out in front of you like a frozen ripple, wooden, weathered, and just high enough to arch over the dark surface of the pond beneath. You step onto it, and the wood creaks softly underfoot, as if sighing from centuries of footsteps before yours. There's no railing, just your balance, your breath, and the hush of the night pressing around you. Below the bridge, the pond reflects the moon well. A moon. You can't be sure it's the real one or just a trick of the water, but either way, it looks like it's winking. A koi surfaces, lazy and golden, trailing ripples that fracture the sky's reflection. You pause at the top of the arch. The bridge doesn't go anywhere special, just from one piece of garden to another. But standing here, you realize that was always the point. Bridges in classical Chinese gardens rarely lead directly across. They meander, curve, tilt. Their purpose isn't to get you somewhere, it's to slow you down, to make sure you don't miss the willow draping over the water or the frog poised on the lily pad, pretending to be ornamental. You cross slowly. Your hand brushes a nearby lantern post, still warm from the fading sun. As you step off the far end of the bridge, a gust of air shakes loose a rain of petals from an overhead peach tree. They drift like pale snow, catching in your hair, melting on your skin. Somewhere in the distance, a wooden wind chime stirs. Ahead lies a moon gate, an almost perfectly round doorway set into a whitewashed garden wall. You pass through without thinking, and suddenly everything is quieter. The moon gate isn't just an entrance, it's a transition. It marks a shift in mood, like a scene change in a silent play. Inside is a scholar's study, a modest pavilion with open walls, a low table, and a view of, well, nothing in particular. A few rocks, a twisty pine, an inkwell carved from jade. You sit, not because you're tired, though maybe you are, but because this place seems to ask it of you. The table holds a set of old brushes. The bristles are stained black, stiff from dried ink. Someone used these once, maybe not to write anything world-changing, maybe just a haiku-like observation about the way moss grows on a rock. That's enough. You pick up a brush, but don't dip it in ink. You just hold it for a moment, imagining the scholar who might have once sat here, composing a line like, "The heron waits, not for the fish, but for the stillness." Okay, maybe not award-winning, but you're sleep-deprived, so it's fine. One corner of the pavilion holds a musical instrument, an old guqin, lacquered black and strung with 7 taut silk strings. You pluck one. The note hums like a dragon exhaling in a dream. Music was an essential part of the scholar's garden, not for performance, but for reflection, for letting the world shrink to the size of a single vibrating note. A small scroll hangs from the beam overhead. The characters read, "Listen to the emptiness." That's not cryptic at all. A cicada chirps once, then stops. Even insects know when to let a moment breathe. Outside the pavilion, you notice a stack of firewood arranged in a very suspiciously organized way, like borderline obsessive. Logs ordered by thickness, length, maybe even scent. You chuckle, then remember that in some gardens, even the firewood was part of the design. Because what if a guest walked past it? Can't just have messy logs now, can we? You stroll toward a bamboo screen behind the pavilion and find yourself in a small medicinal herb garden. The scent here shifts: shiso, mint, ginseng, mugwort. Plants with names like spells, grown not for beauty, but for healing. One section is labeled with small tiles: calm, clarity, sleep. You raise an eyebrow. Sleep, huh? Now they're just taunting you. The herbs grow in odd little clusters. Some bend toward the moonlight. Others seem content to huddle in shadow. You crush a mint leaf between your fingers and inhale. Instant refreshment, like the garden exhaling directly into your lungs. Nearby, a small trough of water catches your attention. It's a deer chaser, or shishi-odoshi, a bamboo fountain that slowly fills with water and then tips over with a soft thud before resetting. You watch it tip once, spill its contents, and then thunk softly against a rock. The sound cuts through the night gently, like a heartbeat at rest. Thunk. Silence. Fill. Thunk. You stand there for a while. Time doesn't matter much anymore. There's a story, half legend, half probable truth, about a poet who once spent 5 years living alone in a garden like this, speaking to no one, just listening to wind and water, and trying to write the perfect sentence. Supposedly, he never succeeded, but he did invent a new kind of tea, so honestly, that's a win. Historians still debate whether his solitude was enlightenment or just glorified napping. Either way, you kind of respect it. Moving on, you approach a low stone wall with embedded glazed tiles, each etched with symbols of the zodiac: rat, ox, tiger. You trace your finger across the cool surface, pausing at your own sign. Maybe it means something. Maybe not, but it feels like it does. Suddenly, the wind shifts, and a cluster of wind-blown leaves tumbles across the path like golden spiders. You sidestep instinctively, then laugh at yourself. Garden ghosts again. They're subtle here. They don't say boo. They rustle paper fans and smell faintly of plum blossoms. Your path leads now to a clearing, lit by moonlight. A single chair sits under an open sky. It's facing nothing, just empty space. And yet, that space is framed perfectly by trees, water, and rocks. You sit, and suddenly the composition makes sense. The void is the view, like the pause in a sentence that gives it meaning. You're not doing anything now, just being, listening, noticing. And that's what these gardens were always about, not seeing beauty, but feeling it settle in your bones. You remain in that chair for a while, minutes, hours. It hardly matters anymore. The air is thick with quiet, not silence exactly, but a layered hush. Frogs murmuring from the water's edge, a leaf brushing a stone, your own breathing, slow and deep, like the garden itself is breathing with you. Eventually, you rise, because the garden nudges you gently forward, not with urgency, but with that same thoughtful pacing it has offered all night long. Each step now feels lighter, less about moving and more about noticing. Ahead, the path narrows again, winding through a copse of bamboo. The stalks tower overhead like sentinels, their shadows crisscrossing the earth like woven silk. When the wind blows, the bamboo groans ever so slightly, like old bones stretching after a nap. You reach out to touch one. It's smooth, cool, slightly damp. You wonder if this bamboo has stood here longer than your own grandparents lived. There's a small detour to the side, barely noticeable if you weren't moving slowly. It leads to a rock that's taller than you, etched faintly with an inscription so old it's nearly faded to nonsense. But you know it's a poem, probably about dew or mortality, or how peaches taste better when stolen. You sit beside the rock and press your back against it. It's still warm from the day, and then you hear a rustle, not animal, not wind, a human rustle. You glance up to see no one. But that's when you remember. Some Chinese gardens were meant to be explored with someone, not necessarily in conversation, but in parallel silence. You'd each take a different path, sometimes glimpsing one another through a window or across a bridge, never speaking, just being near. It was called mutual wandering. The idea was that shared solitude was the purest form of companionship. Historians still debate whether that's deeply romantic or just an elite excuse for not having to make small talk. The garden's final bend reveals a low pavilion built over the pond. It seems to hover on the water, supported by pillars submerged below the surface. You step onto it and feel the gentle shift beneath your feet. The wood smells faintly of lotus petals and thyme. Inside the pavilion are 4 benches, each facing a different view: rock, water, sky, and garden. You pick the one facing the water, not because it's prettier, but because it feels quieter somehow. This was the listening pavilion, or ting, not meant for music, not for reading, just for listening, to rain, to fish jumping, to the gentle slap of waves against stone. A tiny ceramic cup rests on the bench beside you, empty of course, but you imagine it filled with warm chrysanthemum tea, fragrant and faintly bitter. The kind of taste that makes you slow down between sips, not because it's hot, but because it demands respect. And then you notice the stars. They've been there the whole time, of course, but only now, at the edge of the garden, do they become impossible to ignore. Reflected in the pond, mirrored in the sky, tangled in the rippling surface like forgotten dreams. In classical Chinese gardens, the heavens weren't just an overhead bonus, they were a design element. Openings in the trees and gaps in rooftops were intentionally placed to frame the stars, like paintings on silk. You lie down on the wooden planks and stare upward. The Milky Way stretches across the sky like a celestial ribbon. Maybe that's where the scholar's poems went, the ones he tore up in frustration and tossed out the window. Maybe the stars kept them. There's an old story, half fable, half architectural theory, about a garden designer who once rejected a wealthy client because the client asked, "How long will it take?" And the designer replied, "If you must ask that question, the garden will never be finished." You laugh softly. Sounds about right. Gardens, like people, aren't projects. They're process, constantly becoming. A soft splash catches your ear. You turn your head to see a turtle paddling slowly along the edge of the pond. It glances your way, unimpressed. Probably older than you, maybe wiser. Certainly less anxious about inboxes and rent. Somewhere deeper in the garden, a candle flickers out. You don't need to know where. You only know the light is gone now, and the dark is more complete. The pavilion's roof creaks gently in the breeze. You reach into your pocket, not sure why, and find a smooth pebble. Did you pick it up earlier? You must have. You turn it over in your fingers, feel its weight, then set it on the bench beside the teacup. A silent offering, The garden doesn't ask for much, but it always remembers. In the quiet, you recall something the Taoists believed, that the most powerful forces in the world are the ones you don't fight. Water, time, emptiness. They don't shout, they just endure. You lie there a while longer as the stars wheel overhead and the pond sighs softly beneath you. Your breath sinks with the wind, your pulse with the crickets, and though you know there's still a little more to explore, still one final path before the night ends, you stay here. Because this moment, this stillness, is the point. Not the path, not the lesson. Just this, just you, just now. Eventually, and only because the air nudges you onward with a hint of chill, you rise. Your feet make the softest tap on the wooden pavilion floor. The night is deeper now, thick with velvet shadows, and yet your vision adjusts as if the garden itself doesn't want to lose you. You take the final path, narrow, curved, just so, lined with lanterns whose wicks have long burned out. Their presence is ceremonial now, decorative bones of an earlier glow. Moss blankets the edges of the stone steps ahead, giving your tread a plush, muffled texture. You don't hurry. No one hurries here. Hurrying would be rude. This trail leads upward, a gentle slope climbing toward what you sense must be a final overlook. Along the way, the rock placements return, not as dramatic as before, but more purposeful now, more personal. Small stacks, subtle. You pass one that looks like a hand, another like a sleeping fox. One just looks like a bread loaf, and you laugh softly to yourself. Maybe that was intentional. Ancient gardeners probably enjoyed a visual pun now and then, too. You reach a bend where a plum tree leans over the path. Its blossoms have long since fallen, but the scent clings faintly in the air, the memory of sweetness. There's a wooden sign beneath it, barely readable in the moonlight. It says, simply, "Wait here." So you do. And after a moment, just as you start to think it might have been a trick or a leftover relic, a breeze sweeps through the tree's branches. They rattle faintly, and a single petal, just one drifts down and lands on your arm. Not a metaphor, not an idea, just a perfect, silent moment. The garden's last ascent isn't steep, but it feels ceremonial, like walking into a dream you once had but forgot. At the top, you find a round moon gate, one of those perfect stone circles framing the world beyond like a lens. But this one is different. Instead of looking out over another part of the garden, it faces a blank wall of rock. You blink. Did they mess up? Is this unfinished? Historians still argue whether these false gates were mistakes, jokes, or quiet philosophical statements. Maybe all three. The point was never what's beyond, but that you approached it, that you bothered to climb the hill, that you stood in front of the gate and asked yourself, what now? You turn and sit on the bench tucked into the curve of the hill. From here, the garden unfolds below like a quiet memory. You can't see all of it, but that's the point. You know it's still there. The winding paths, the meandering streams, the silent rocks still holding their stories. And just to your left is a small stone lantern unlit, of course. You peer inside and see a rolled scrap of paper. Against your better judgment, you pull it out and unroll it slowly. It's a poem. No title, no signature, just brushstrokes curling like vines. A rock is just a poem that forgot how to speak. Water reads it slowly, one ripple at a time. You smile. Of course. This was the true end of the garden, not a structure, not a pavilion or an overlook. Just a moment of stillness at the top of the world, with a poem that may have waited centuries for you to arrive. You sit longer than you meant to. Your spine eases. Your fingers relax. You realize your jaw has unclenched. Your breath has deepened. Your thoughts have quieted into whispers. Maybe that's why the scholars loved these gardens, not because they were showpieces, but because they were refuges from all the things that made noise, from obligations, from interruptions, from performance. And suddenly, you understand something you didn't before, not in your head, but in your bones. The best gardens don't show you nature. They show you yourself without the static. One last breath. You rise slowly, leaving the poem where it was. You take a step back through the moon gate, facing the rock once more, and bow not deeply, just enough. Enough to say thank you. Then you descend, letting gravity do the work, letting the garden carry you gently back through the paths you once traced. Only now, they feel changed. Or maybe you do. As you pass the pond again, you notice the turtle still swimming, still unbothered. You give it a respectful nod. It ignores you completely. Classic turtle. And as you near the exit, if it even is an exit, you glance behind you one last time. The rocks, the water, the bamboo, the bridges, the shadows, they don't wave goodbye. They don't need to, because they're still there, and they'll wait. So now, dear listener, the path has ended. There's nothing more you need to follow. No more lanterns to guide your way, no puzzles to decode. Just the gentle hum of night still lingering around you, like the hush after a lullaby. Your breath slows, deep and steady, in rhythm with the pond's imagined ripples. You feel the weight of your body resting gently, fully supported by your bed, as if the garden itself had wrapped around you like moss hugging stone. There's no rush, no final thought to cling to. The images from tonight rocks that read like poetry, bridges that hide and reveal, windows into stillness, drift softly through your mind like fallen petals in a slow stream. You don't need to hold on to them. Let them float. Let them go. Outside, the stars remain where they've always been, watching, whispering, waiting for you, should you ever wish to wander again, because the garden never truly closes. Not the real ones, not the ones built from quiet and care. They live on inside you, rooted in silence, blooming in rest. So close your eyes now. Let sleep come softly, like moonlight touching still water. And if you dream, may it be in slow, winding paths, where time is gentle and your soul is unhurried.